Okay, good morning. Thanks for joining. Let's get started. Did you know that many of the reasons why many students actually don't find online learning effective, it's because of the poor quality of the webinar and not necessarily because of the instructor? So I'm going to be covering today many of the components that make a webinar not so effective and how you can avoid it. Because it's not always necessarily about the technology or the instructor, but there are activities, elements, dynamics that don't work well with this type of format. And I would like to share those with you today. My name is Miko Nino, Director of the Office of Online Learning. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box, any comments, any thoughts. I'm going to go through them. And we are going to be able to discuss also at the end. I'm going to be making some pauses so you can ask questions as needed as well. So by the end of this session, I want you to apply certain considerations and strategies to effectively teach in an online course that has a synchronous format. And I also want you to apply settings that are very useful and important when you are teaching in this modality. So let's get started. The first thing that I encourage you to do, and many people don't, is to record and listen to yourself. I know it might sound like a cliche, and you have heard this before, but it's really important that you record and listen to yourself. There are a couple of things that sometimes we do with our breathing. There are words that we tend to repeat way too many times. There is some monotony sometimes in our voice, and you have to be aware of the product that you're delivering to your students. I give you that is sometimes uncomfortable to watch yourself on video or to hear your voice on an audio. I myself have recorded lots of audio, and sometimes it feels odd to have to listen to myself. But it's an amazing exercise for you to detect those problems when you are delivering content. When I started my career in public speaking, because I have done lots of public speaking besides my regular job, and I have done webinars and training, one problem that I had was that I had a tendency to speak too fast. And it was not until I recorded myself that I could find a good pace because I was realizing I was not making enough pauses. And there are techniques that you have for that. I will look at the end how many times I said a particular word with pauses, or I will look at the whole length of the audio. Obviously, if my length increased by 5, 6, or 10 minutes, that meant that I was making more pauses and that my pace was better. That's not going to be necessarily your problem or your case, but I encourage you to record and listen to yourself to be able to find the best strategy for you. This is going to be an overview. So if you want to discuss more techniques or you want to get some coaching or you need to work to for specific problems, we can talk individually. There is always the big question, should I lecture? Because many people have seen by now that the lecture has been heavily antagonized, especially in a webinar, especially when you are teaching synchronously. And people ask me all the time, should I lecture or should I completely change to something else? And the answer is, it really depends. And I have to be completely frank when it comes to the lecture. The lecture has been a powerful, useful strategy that has been around for years. It has a lot of value and it really teaches a lot to your students. Furthermore, sometimes when your students are not familiar at all with a topic, the lecture might be the best mechanism for you to deliver information. If you sometimes start asking them to be hands on without them having any information, those activities might not be effective at all. Similarly, if you are asking your students to apply knowledge and they don't have any foundations, they will get confused. So that's why the lecture is important. The problem is not lecturing. The problem is lack of engagement. The problem is a monotony in the way you speak. The problem might be the slides, but it's not necessarily the method. So I really encourage you to consider using lecture and don't get fully rid of it just because you see research or trends antagonizing the lecture. I can guarantee you that if you are engaging enough, that if you have a good PowerPoint, if you know how to conduct a webinar or a lecture, you are going to be able to fully catch the attention of your students. Johnny Depp is well known for being one of the most versatile actors out there. He can interpret many characters, and sometimes it's really hard to recognize him from one movie to another. That is known in acting as range. He has a big range and he can move comfortably between one role to another. In public speaking and in teaching, we have something also called range. Some people are naturally born with the ability to move and use the voice as cues and to express emotions and to engage and to connect with an audience. Other people might have a more limited range. It doesn't mean if you have a more limited range that you cannot work towards that. The point of me saying this is that you have to check your range. Do you find yourself always speaking with a monotonous tone of voice? Do you find yourself always conveying the same emotions? And I'm going to show you in a second why I say this, because you have to speak with purpose. Purpose makes a difference when you're speaking. If you find that you have limited range, there are techniques, there are exercises that you can use to expand your range and to be able to connect with your audience by using your voice. You have to remember that in an online session, it's more challenging because you're physically not being able to use your body or other items as cues to signal or to show what is important or not. Furthermore, you're not going to be able to see your students, and that lack of connection can make it more difficult to catch their attention. But if you have enough range, or you work towards your range, or you use your range, because many people have a huge range, they don't use it. They believe that teaching has to be in one particular way. And what I have seen in the most effective speakers is the ability to have that versatility. Connected with range, it's the fundamentals that you have to know your purpose when you are presenting, when you're speaking. Most of you, it is true that in these sessions you're going to be teaching. And when so, it's okay to be lecturing and focusing on that modality. But if you analyze, I'm sure that in many instances, your webinars or your recording are not going to be about teaching. It's going to be more to inform. You're going to be presenting new information that you want the learner to be aware of. In those cases, and I'm going to present for each one of these some strategies, in those cases, you don't need to necessarily lecture and you don't have to necessarily have a lot of interaction with the learner because you just want them aware of information. In other instances, what you're doing is training. Training is different from teaching because when you train, you are working with a specific skill. That means that after the session, they should be able to practice or master something new, one specific skill, one or two. So when you're doing training, obviously you will need to have lots of demonstration, lots of hands-on, and you have to give them time to practice because that's the goal of training. If I'm joining a session just to be informed and you make me practice and be super hands-on, I might lose engagement because I'm not being there to be trained. I'm just going there to get information and to be aware of that. In other instances, what you want to do with your audience is to persuade them. And you have to use facts and you have to work a lot with the affective domain to ensure that they are being persuaded and that you're seeing a change in behaviors and attitudes. In those instances, if you don't have enough expertise in the topic or you believe that your voice is not enough, you might have to use other resources like videos or invite a guest speaker or show them facts, numbers to convince them. Very different than teaching because in teaching you don't have to make that persuasion process. And rarely, but happens sometimes, especially now in the times of COVID, the webinar and these sessions are used to entertain. It doesn't mean that you cannot be entertaining when you teach. It doesn't mean that you are not informing or persuading when you teach. What I'm trying to say with this is that one of these One of these five are going to lead the whole session. And you have to make sure you're doing anything to either train, inform, persuade, teach, or entertain. If there's something that I want you to take away from this session, and if you have to pick just one lesson, I encourage you for it to be this one. Don't read. I'm sure you know this, but some people don't believe me, but people can tell when you're reading. People can really tell when you're reading, especially in a webinar, in a synchronous, even if they're not looking at your video or your camera is off. They can tell when you're reading. I really am against reading during a session that is being recorded or a webinar. It's okay to read a fact, a number, a quote, maybe an introduction. But if you are reading more than that, if you're reading from the slides, from a piece of paper, you are going to lose engagement from your students. And there's research supporting this. The tone of your voice changes, and your ability to connect with the audience and to tell a true story changes when you're reading. So I really encourage you not to do that. Speak from the heart, speak with the truth. You're an expert in your field. You have done this before, you know the topic. You can just go ahead and tell a story, make important connections, and furthermore, make sure that they know that there's a human being, a person with emotions talking behind the screen. Make sure you invest in great equipment. One of the main reasons why people get frustrated during these sessions is because of the poor quality in the equipment. The audio is not good, the microphone it's not good. You hear the person talking far, far, far away, or there's a lot of feedback, background noise. Sometimes the quality of the video is not the best, things are slow. You have to invest in great equipment. That doesn't mean that you have to spend a lot of money, and I'm not telling you to go and buy things now. This is a frank conversation that you should have with your department if you believe that the equipment that you have is not making you have the best experience. So make sure you check your equipment. And that's another reason why one of the first things that I told you was to record yourself. Because when you record yourself, you're not only aware of how you sound, but also the quality of the microphone, if there's background noise. And furthermore, if there's a space where you're working that tends to be more noisy than others. So it's very important to have good equipment. When you are teaching these classes synchronously, I encourage you to avoid chit chatting. Have you been to those sessions in which people spend a good 10, 15, even 20 minutes introducing themselves? Sometimes you can see the video, sometimes you can't. But people really don't care, and I'm being totally frank, about just seeing a name and a video and spend time just going around that. I believe in building community and I believe in people getting to know each other, but there are other mechanisms to do that. You have to be mindful that you have just a couple of minutes to catch the attention from your learner because this is online and you might not be able to see them. And even if you ask them to have the video on, they might not be fully paying attention. So you have just minutes to be able to gain that attention. And if you spend time talking about trivial stuff, or trying to ask people around for something that is not really relevant, you're going to lose engagement. What I suggest is that you use other mechanisms to get them to be connected. You can ask them to go to a WebEx Teams, which is an app that we have, and they can post their names with their pictures so they get to know who is in the class. Or you can use the Canvas discussion board for those introductions, or you can use Flipgrid, which actually we're having a training at 2, for them to record a short video saying something entertaining and putting a name so they get to know each other. That is more organized, more time effective, and actually they can go back to that Flipgrid or that discussion board as needed to connect with their peers. So I really encourage you to drop the whole let's introduce ourselves and to having those 10, 15 minutes just chatting in a mechanism to break the ice. There are other ways to break the ice. Value. It's very important that you advertise the value of your class. Within the first minute or so, you should be telling your students in this webinar, in this lecture, in this session, I'm going to teach you this skill, or we're going to be learning these facts, or this is going to be useful for you because of this and that. You have to sell the value of your class. Your classes have a lot of worth. There are so many interesting things. And sometimes we fail and we're too modest because we don't sell that value. Use the first minutes to say, hey, by the time you're done with me in this session, this is what you're going to learn. And this is how you can apply it to something that you're doing later on, either in the class, in your program, or in your life. Always show a slide. I know that some people like to be seen and they believe that a good way of having presence is to put their video on. But I'm gonna be honest, it's not really effective to have your video on just with your face for 10, 15, 20, even an hour. I have seen sessions in which there's just the video of the speaker. And unless you are a really engaging speaker and you are really making a lot of storytelling through the process, you're going to lose attention. So I encourage you to always show a slide. It doesn't have to be too many slides. It doesn't have to be a slide for everything, but the key points of your presentation needs to be supported by the slide. Slides, when well designed and when they are picture rich, they're really powerful to get that attention. And when it comes to this, I always tell people, well, I always say that in general, but it's important to take a risk. Sometimes you have to bring to your webinar or to your session a really powerful image, something that is thought provoking, something that in a way can challenge the status quo, something that makes them think. Make sure that your claims and the information that you're providing is supported by an image. From the cognitivist point of view, you build a strong mental model in the brain of your learners when you're connecting your spoken words with a specific image or an idea. So always show a slide because that will build those strong representations in their brain. So those are some general considerations as you start preparing for these lessons or webinars. Let's talk a little bit about the technology because you can be a great speaker and you can do all the right things, but then the settings and the technology they can work against you, and then it's a failure. Happens a lot. So you don't have to be afraid of technology. I believe sometimes the problems with webinars is that people are afraid of them and the technology. So I'm going to show you some settings that can make your experience and your students' experience more pleasant. There's a problem with the video on, and I get it that you want to see if your students sometimes are paying attention and if they're sleeping or what they're doing. I'm going to show you some techniques to make sure they're active, paying attention, that don't require for you to be with the video on. The video on has the problem that it puts the bandwidth really, really slow. And that's why people cannot hear you. They have delays, they get kicked out and they have to come back whenever possible. The video on tends to be problematic. Furthermore, with certain settings, and especially if you're showing the slides and all of that, there's a point in which it's hard for you and for others to see everybody on the grid, to see them, to see their video on. So I personally encourage people not to have the video on. It increases the speed of that bandwidth, and also it helps you focus on showing and for them to see things that really matter. I'm not saying that looking at your classmates is not important, but let's be honest, after 5 minutes, it gets old. You don't, I mean, and if you do that every week, you know these people already. So don't focus on looking at everybody through the video, but focus on using powerful slides with images, with thoughts, with ideas to build those models, those mental models of knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some settings, and this is going to vary according to the tool. But because we are using WebEx, and I know Zoom is coming, but until that comes, let's talk about WebEx, and you can find the same settings in other tools. So this is what I like to do. The first thing is that I go to participant on the menu here on WebEx when I'm starting my meeting, and I click and I make make sure I have a check on mute on entry. It's very annoying for everyone, especially for the person speaking, and especially if people are late. If you hear that beep, beep, beep every time somebody comes in and they start speaking. So the mute on entry, you don't have to be repeating, hey, make sure you mute yourself. Make sure. No, automatically they're gonna be muted when they log in or when they join. So I always make sure that's on. The exit and the exit tone, that's what I told you about. I uncheck it, so make sure it doesn't have a check mark, because that beeping every time somebody comes and goes, it's disturbing. And if you have a big class, you can spend a good 5 minutes of your first of the first minutes of the sessions, the first part of your session, just hearing that beeping. People don't like it. That's feedback that I gather tells me that that's very annoying. So I encourage you to uncheck that one. I uncheck anyone can share, because I have had incidents in which, because people have been able to share, they hit the wrong thing. And I'm not going to get too specific here because I want to respect people's privacy. But I have seen a lot. We have seen a lot in those sessions, things that we didn't have to see. And also, your presentation gets kicked out or something like that. So make sure that you are the only one who can share. You can always assign privileges to other people to share the responsibility of sharing, so to say. But make sure that's the setting that you have there. And then if you are having frustration because people still unmute themselves or something like that, and you don't know who is the person causing the noise, sometimes there's feedback and you don't know who that person is, you go to participant and you make sure you mute them all. It has to have a chat box. I didn't have anyone on the session when I took the screenshot. So you do that. Okay, so that's very important. I really encourage you to do that. Now, when you're doing a demo, some people, and this is, I like to preach with the example. When you're doing the memo of a tool, in some cases it's okay to stop sharing your PowerPoint, you open the tool, and then you play with it and people can see it because you're still sharing the screen. But sometimes, in some cases, the tool doesn't let you do that, or it can be really, really problematic. So I encourage you in instances like that to do something like this. You take a screenshot and you use something like a circle and color or underlining to explain where they have to go. And I have another example of that. So instead of interrupting the flow of things by going ahead to the software and show, you can take screenshots and then mark as needed to do the explanation. Another thing that I wanted to discuss in terms of settings, it's the microphones and the muting. And I know that many faculty members, and that's something that I fully respect, as all the choices that they make, I believe faculty members should decide on their courses and act accordingly. But as a suggestion, as feedback that I have seen, there is a problem with microphones, and when you want your students to be always talking using the microphone. The first one is that waiting time kills engagement. If you have a lot of students and you're asking them the same question and they have to speak in turns, that waiting time kills engagement big time. There are other mechanisms to get everyone's feedback right away. I'm going to explain those in a second. The second problem with the microphone is that the bad quality is frustrating. If a couple people, I cannot hear them, they speak, in such a way that they seem that they're far away, there's feedback, there's noise, that's going to be frustrating as well and kills engagement. And also, being honest, research has demonstrated that some people, similarly to being in a face-to-face classroom, they don't like to speak over the microphone, so you might experience less participation. The beauty of online, especially when you're doing a session like this, is that there are tools, free tools that you can use to make sure everybody's engaged and everybody is participating. So my favorite ones are Mentimeter, it's free, and Cisco WebEx now with the update allows you to get that feedback or participation, and I'm going to show you the settings as well, how that works. But Cisco WebEx now allows you to do that. When we're talking about the microphones and muting, I encourage you to establish your Q&A, and everybody's different. Some people like to stop along the way and say, hey, this is a good time for questions. Other people say use the chat box. That's completely valid as well. It's more organized, in my opinion, to have the chat box. And when you are ready to take a break or take questions, you can go through the chat box and read the questions and address them. That's good because it avoids the waiting time, the bad quality issue, and also everyone, even those who are shy about speaking up, can participate. As I say, use these tools like Mentimeter or Cisco WebEx to gather feedback, to poll your students, to get to know if they have any questions or concerns. And if it's possible, you can have an assistant. Sometimes when I know the session requires lots of interaction, Q&A, I have somebody help me monitor Q&A or host the session in such a way that they can be dealing with the questions and the answers. Whatever you decide to use, make sure everyone tests the technology. So ahead of time, make sure you tell your students, hey, we're going to be using this technology. We're going to be using Mentimeter. Make sure you play around before you come to the session, and you do the same. One of the reasons why a webinar or a recorded lecture or a synchronous lecture fails is because you spend 5 to 10 minutes exploring the tool, dealing with the tool, solving tech problems with the tool, when in fact you should just go to the topic right away. If you start a session dealing with technology problems for 10 minutes, I'm telling you, it's going to be really hard to get that engagement back. You have to use every single moment to get that attention. Have you seen slides like this when you are in these webinars? Well, this is something to be avoided. And this one at least has 3 divisions. So this should be avoided. There are worse ones like this one. There's no way people are going to read all of that. There's no way that you're going to engage people if you read all of these while people are looking at the screen. I encourage you to use an approach more like this one. If I'm talking about sharing documents, I just put my keyword there. Whatever the main idea that I want your brain to register is shared documents. And I just put a picture that represents shared documents. That's all. People are not going to read through all of that. You lose engagement. And that's why I say make sure you use powerful images when you're connecting them to these keywords that you have. Here, less is more. Less text, powerful images. I'm saying here share documents because if you have text that they have to read, handouts, because I give you that. Sometimes they have to read all of that. We're not saying that that's not necessary. My point here is that you should share those links or documents before they come to class or even during class so they can read on their own. But the webinar or the synchronous session should not be a moment for you to read or for them to read for the screen. It's more for you to connect with them, tell them the key points, and make them think. As I said, WebEx has now a new feature that allows you to gather feedback and to increase participation. So I encourage you to use it because that avoids the problem of the microphone. The microphone also, when you don't have people speaking and you decide to record the session, you have a clean experience. You have a really clean experience when you record and you post afterwards. So that's another reason why I suggest this. So when you go to WebEx, you are going to see at the bottom these 3 buttons, and you're going to click on the dots, the 3 dots, and you're going to choose polling. When you go there, it's going to allow you to ask questions, any question, and you can put choices. Are you enjoying the session? And be creative. You can be creative because again, you don't want to be monotonous. You want to be creative in every possible way. So ask questions that makes them think and makes them wake up if they are feeling sleepy. What I like about this one is that you can have data analytics. So by just clicking some buttons, it will show you who said what, how many students pick A, B, and C, which one is the right answer. It will do it all for you. You can also change the question type, and you have the option of have a single answer that they have to type, multiple answers, or a short answer. So I really like that one a lot. I use Mentimeter a lot, but I'm starting to think that I'm gonna switch to using just the polling because that allows you to actually just stay in one screen with you. I see that somebody has a question. Yes, I will take it now.
Uh, actually, oh, actually, I just wanted to put a plug in for using the polling, because you can set up your poll before your session, and then as you start your WebEx, you can pull it up and minimize it. And then when it's time, you click on and all your questions are there. You don't waste any time. And you can do a lot of fun things with polling too. It's a good way to, I teach psychology, so we've got a lot of, fun topics, and interesting topics. I mean, as I'm sure you all have interesting things in your own discipline, but it's been kind of a fun way to get students engaged. But I would encourage you to set up your poll ahead of time, and then you can open it up before your WebEx begins. So it just makes things flow more quickly. One other thing I wanted to say is that I want to put a plug in for having video on. My first session in the fall, I didn't require the video. And the second one, I just wanted to see how it would go. And I just felt so much more connected to the students. And I felt like students became more engaged. I understand sometimes there are problems with, some students losing video connection, but for the most part, it's worked well. So, but it makes me feel more engaged with the students. I do have to put, I have to look better than if we're not, when I don't have my video on, but I'm really enjoying just one day a week we do the the live, the synchronous with video on, and I feel like I'm getting to know my students better. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Really, really good important points. And I believe every situation is different. Maybe for that particular class, maybe the number of students allows you to have that connection, and the topic can be more conversational. So yes, you have to do whatever works for you in that very instance. If you realize that the video is not something that is working, that's the reason why we provide the other strategies to make sure that you don't have to deal with the negative side of video that sometimes happens. But yeah, good questions with good points actually. So when you are doing the WebEx, I encourage you also to use the breakout rooms. That's something that before we had with training, WebEx training, but now you can use it in your training, in your session, actually, in your personal room. So basically what happens is that you are going to click on breakout, and you're going to click on enable breakout sessions. Okay. And then you can decide as many breakout sessions as you need. And furthermore, if you go to the settings, you have the ability to work with some settings, like you can allow them to come back to the main room. You can close that breakout session after X amount of minutes. You can warn them that it's closing X amount of seconds before, and things like that. I like this one because sometimes when you have too many students and you want to have a discussion, it might not be effective to have 25, 30 people talking in the same room. People get frustrated. You might have a rich shared discussion if you have smaller groups and you navigate through them as a facilitator. It gets more hands-on as well, and it gives you an experience like almost asking them to work in teams in the face-to-face classroom through the breakout option. So I encourage you to use this one a lot. Keeps things more organized, and the noise of having so many people speak at the same time gets reduced when you use this setting. So I'm gonna give you an example of teaching in a synchronous class. Is you have to, for instance, teach a class that is completely, you have an hour to go via WebEx and you have to teach it. These are some suggestions that I encourage you to use. And again, you can modify as needed, and every instance is completely different. I will start with an image or maybe with some news, with a joke, or with a current issue that connects to the topic that you're going to talk about. It's very important to use one of these strategies to gain attention. Be careful with jokes because I have sometimes used jokes that they don't go by really well, and you have to be able to read your audience and see how they react to the joke. That happened to me one time when I was speaking in Ireland and I make a joke that I'm assuming most Americans will have understood and it didn't go well at all. So nowadays, make sure that you know your audience and you do some research when you're talking about these things. The other day, I did a webinar for a university in Rwanda, and because I had learned the hard way, I made sure I did my research about some of the cultural implications when speaking to an audience like that. So whatever you choose, make sure not because it's online, it means it's universal. You still have to take into account your audience. Who are your students? More so, what age range do you think they are? What year? What major? And you shape based on that to make these decisions about what image to choose, the news that you want to share, or even the joke. It's very important that you gain that attention. Many of you are familiar with Gagne's nine events. The sequence of nine events starts with that, and I think, as I said, you have sometimes just a couple of minutes, in other instances seconds, to catch that attention. So take a risk and do something that provoking or even fun, something outrageous to gain that attention. The second thing that I encourage you is to have a list of key items and words. And for me, that's probably the most important thing. If you prepare the brain of your learners and you tell them, hey, this week my key items are family, clan, and tribe. These are the three key items and words that I want you to pay attention to when you warn the brain and the brain is ready for that. Even if you start to be disconnected, every time they hear that word or you say it, the brain's gonna try to make a connection to the content. So that's why telling them ahead the key items of the lessons is very important. Also, use your voice as a cue, as a mechanism to emphasize when you're mentioning those words. So if they're daydreaming, or if you start to lose attention, using your voice and the modulation, the pitch, changing the tone and the intentionality of your voice can make them be aware of that key item words. Just tell them. As I said, avoid reading. People can tell when you're reading. And we have been students, and in feedback that I have gathered, students frankly say, I would have just read the book. Had I known that this was about to reading the slides, I would have myself just gotten the slides and read, or I have just gotten myself into reading the book. And that's a frank face-to-face classroom, but it's okay just to have few texts, images, something more organized. The brain cannot read something that is 5 or 4 lines of just text like that. If you really need to have text like that because you believe the information is needed, have a list with just key phrases and words, because that way the brain can register that better. As I said, share your documents through links and don't make them read there. The synchronous session should not be a moment for them to be reading there. I will flip the classroom if you ask me, so they can prepare with that information. Or if you believe they need, to read on their own time, I will then reduce the synchronous class to give them that time to read through the links that they get because of you. If you are going to be doing a synchronous class to teach, that's your goal, I will provide a check for understanding every 15 minutes or so. It doesn't have to be a formal quiz. It can be just one question. It can be just a polling thing, just to see if there are some misconceptions or if they're getting the content the way you see them. And this applies when you're teaching, because if you're informing, if you're entertaining, if you are training, you don't necessarily to you have to do that. That happens when you're teaching. Very important to make that distinction. Also, I also encourage you to use interactivity as necessary. Something that I have seen in evaluations, training evaluations, teaching evaluations, is that sometimes students feel that a group activity or a team activity or a hands-on activity was forced. They said basically that they didn't see the purpose of getting into those activities, and they saw them just as an opportunities to, kill time. Sometimes they have said that the lecture was going well and they feel that that space there was completely useless. And I'm saying this because we see currently that the lecture has been antagonized so much that now there's a huge push for disruptive pedagogy. And I get it, but you cannot jeopardize quality in your teaching just because people are saying that you have to be hands on. If people don't know the content and you're delivering good content, engaging content, and they don't know anything, what value can you find in a force interactive just for the sake of interactivity? So that's really important to keep in mind when you are preparing your lesson. If you ask me what are good examples of interactivity, I will say the polls. Make sure the questions are thought provoking. If you use something like Mentimeter, they create word clouds. Students love that because you can see the frequency and the themes that emerge. You can have a contest every now and then just to make sure the gamification is something that students enjoy. So the contest is something that you can use. And also, I like to address misconceptions. Students really, really benefit when you focus on that knowledge that is not true, but people think it's true. Make sure you address those as well. I like also the mini teamwork in breakout rooms, but again, make sure you add value. If your students are in an intro class, fundamental class, and they are actually unaware of many things, do you really think there's going to be value in just asking them to discuss? It has happened to me a lot when I attend training. I go in there and I like constructivism a lot. I find myself being a constructivist quite often. But my problem with constructivism is that sometimes you cannot be just super hands off from the start. If people need to master content and you're the person who knows that, there's not going to be value in asking them to have these discussions all the time. There's a reason why you're the instructor. There's one reason why you're the trainer. They want to hear from you how it's done. In more advanced instances, and to maybe see a balance in knowledge, yes, you can use the discussion, but trust your ability to lecture and not to use these ones if you don't see value in that, because all that happens is that you lose engagement. And also, we have provided a three-part presentation about alternatives to lectures. Those are in our YouTube channel. If you have not seen them or you have not been part of that, I encourage you to do that because we have 25 methods besides the recorded lecture or the lecture that you can use on a webinar or even in an asynchronous class. So if you want to be super hands-on, it's just not a matter of forcing a team activity. There are other things that are going to be more aligned with your learning outcomes. So I encourage you to take a look at that presentation.
Nico, I have a question.
Sure.
This is Lydia Gunn. Could you go back to that last slide? I just like for you to explain what is a word cloud because I
Okay.
think you went kind of fast and I didn't understand the
Yeah,
word
when you
cloud.
use yes, when you use Mentimeter, which is a tool that we can explore individually. You can request a consultation. Your students are going to submit answers, and it forms a word cloud. Have you seen a word cloud?
No. Mm.
It's basically all the words that they say put together in one diagram.
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I see Annette, and I'm gonna also read some questions in the meantime. So Annette, please.
No, I didn't mean to hit that. I was trying to hit my microphone to say, no, I had never seen a word cloud. And then, so I don't have a question.
Ah, no problem. So yes, WebEx allows you to keep a record of attendance. Yes. So the updates for WebEx are really good. I encourage you to check them out.
Okay, thank you.
The Okay, that is. I think that that question that I have been asked about the S sound in your recordings, I think it has to do in my experience with the space. It doesn't have to do with the microphone. It has to do with the space. This is going to be a little painful, but it really works if you don't have the ability to go to a soundproof space. But you know those boxes where the eggs come? If you put those boxes in the wall, it really isolates the noise. I know it's a pain because imagine how many boxes I need to gather to do that. But hey, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But yes, it has to do with the space. You reduce the S with the space. Yes, Maria, I see your hand.
I'm so sorry. Actually, I was trying to lower the hand because I have raised the hand before to make a comment to Lydia's question that it's not just the words, but they the the size of the words is different depending on how many people say that word, right? I haven't used it in WebEx, but whenever I use word cloud things for
Yeah.
papers and stuff, is when you get in feedback in whatever form, focus groups, whatever, you create that word cloud where you know if a lot of people are saying the same word, that word is it's bigger than the others. I don't know if it's the same in WebEx. I don't know if theirs are weighted by the frequency of that word.
Yes, the more
Yeah,
people say a word, the bigger that word gets.
right,
That's completely accurate. Good
right.
questions, good conversation. And I'm gonna do a little demo at the end so you can see about that too. Okay, so when you are preparing for a class or a session and you don't know if it's going to be well organized and you don't know how to structure that and you want to be time effective, and this is something that you can consider and you can reformulate these questions. But something that really helps when you are doing a webinar or teaching, you can frame the whole session based on these four questions, the answers to those four questions. What problem or need do we have? Because you are going to add value. Your lesson is going to add value. And in order to demonstrate that value, you have to talk about a problem or a need that exists. And in a way, your lesson is going to add value. So then you talk about the solutions and present the resources that you have to that problem or that need. Then you make sure your students understand how they can use those solutions or information. That's where they see the relevance. Okay, there's a problem. My instructor is giving me all of these resources, these facts, this information. Now, the instructor is telling me how I can use this information or these solutions. And then the instructor is going to tell me what is next, or the instructor is going to let me figure out what's next, what I want to do with that. And it's not going to work universally, but try to always have a couple questions guiding how you're going to structure your lesson. Highly effective. Highly effective when you're doing a speech, especially, but also when you are trying to get engagement because your students want to see value, they want to see relevance, they want to see connections to the real world, and they want to see how they are changing through learning. So something like this can be very effective. I suggest that you surprise your audience. One way of doing that is to be done before you promise. You never go, beyond. You have to go and be done before. In some cases, I will raffle a prize or give extra points for those who are on time and don't join 2 or 3 minutes after, or if they're before, or if they stay the whole time without leaving. You can use negative feedback. You give everyone 100 points, and if they every time they don't come to class or they're late, then they lose points. That's a good way of also getting engagement. You can ask your students and you can rotate your students to be guest lecturers or commenters. So they will come prepared to class. to co-lecture with you or to comment or to be a guest speaker. And in that way, you add another voice to the session, and your students can connect with the classmates. And also sometimes you can embed your content in a story and you tell the story. Instead of lecturing, you can just tell stories, more like case-based learning. If you are training and you're conducting training, which is different from teaching, you have to make sure the students practice the skills. That's why training in 1 hour sometimes is hard, and we inform instead of train, because for good training to happen, that students have to practice the skill. After they practice that skill, you have to provide feedback. So you have to find a way to critique and to suggest how they can improve that practice that they had. And you have to make sure you show lots of examples, lots of non-examples, and lots of demonstrations. So in training, you will rely more on pictures and videos than in teaching. And the last thing that I want to say is to be yourself. You have made it really far. You're very talented faculty. You're very smart. You're experts in your field. You have done a great job. Nobody can deny that. So my suggestions and suggestions that you read from other sources are not necessarily an attempt to tell you you're doing something wrong or you have to change who you are. No, you have to be yourself. Nothing is more engaging. Nothing is more beautiful. Nothing is better than being authentic. People can tell when you are not being yourself. There is beauty in the way you present. What you have to do is find yourself, your style, who you are, and improve based on that, but never change your essence as you speak. So that's why I told you, you have to record yourself to find the assets and the good things that your presentation style has. And with that, I wanted to take some questions, and you have been typing them. But I wanted to do a little demonstration about another tool that is not included in WebEx, just for fun. Please go use your cell phone, get your cell phone, okay? And go to menti.com. From your cell phone, go to menti.com, and it's gonna ask you for a code. Don't worry about the spaces. Just type the code. And I have a question there for you. What would you apply from this presentation? Just in one word, what would you apply from this presentation? Menti.com, type the code, let me know what would you apply from this presentation. You can use your tablet, your phone, your computer, any device.
Miko, I cannot see the word menti, and when I typed it in my phone, I landed in some Chinese website. Is it because the viewing Miguel Nino's screen is over the word, so I don't know if I typed it correctly. Can you spell it? Menti is like M-E-N.
M-E-N-T-I, menti.com.
Oh, T-I. Okay. See, because that is behind the viewing, so I couldn't see it. Thank you.
menti.com, yes.
Okay.
Okay. The first answers are showing up: presentation, technology, skills, tip, polling. So for those of you asking how mentimeter.com and how the word cloud function, it's basically that. Presentation seems to be the biggest word there. So that means that more people are saying that. And again, I know that many people are going to say, well, I still prefer my students to use the microphone. I still prefer my students to do this and that. And that's completely fine. I'm not trying to really change your style. I always respect that, and everybody else should. But my point is, like, you are in a world in which your students are enjoying this kind of software, and you have to use technology for you. And this is one of those things that, I mean, we are having a very organized discussion in which I just, in a couple of minutes, less than 2 minutes, I just realized that polling is the biggest thing that you're going to use. I didn't have to go through multiple rounds of noise with the microphone asking, and then maybe have to tally and get a sense. what the majority say. I didn't have to do any of that. In a very organized way, without noise, without feedback, without problems, I was able to get that. And that's why I encourage you to use that versus the other. Nobody got impatient because you had to wait. Nobody was shy to speak up, and it was time effective. Because if I ask you individually, we will still be with person number 2 or 3 probably. So it's free. It's free. So just if you have to use it, you go to mentimeter.com, and that's how you set the whole thing. So you add the word meter at the end, mentimeter.com. You set up a free account, and you can set questions and all of that. There is a pro version, but I have never paid for that one. The free one has helped me all the time. Very important that you make sure your students have something like a device handy. And that's a good way, because I'm sure your students will have the phone anyway, try to look for something else. But if you're using these kind of activities, you bring their attention. You bring their attention. They don't only have word clouds. They have, and I'm going to show you real quick.
Miko, I have a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Did you prepare this in advance and then the code was generated at that point when you type
Yes.
the question?
Yes, I prepare in advance.
Okay. All right.
Yes, you have a, I'm gonna give an example here. I picked the word cloud, but you can have also a contest. You can have a quiz, open-ended, a competition, multiple opportunities here. And you can clear this. So, okay, I'm done. I can just reset results. That deletes for everything. And then I can use the same one. And I
So
can
these
have,
are all available from the Mentimeter once you set up account for you to use.
sorry?
So all these features that you're showing us right now, these are available for free at mentimeter.com, right? When you set up the account.
Well, not the videos, but you have the ability to create questions like this.
Right, not the video. I'm talking about the features you're showing us right now on the
Yes,
right
that's,
hand.
yeah, Menti. Yeah, all of this is in mentimeter.com.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
oh, can I ask a question about this? Can
Sure.
you? So we go to mentimeter.com and set up some questions. And then while we're doing our synchronous session, we tell students to go to menti.com.
Yes, that's accurate. Actually, when you're done and you're ready to show, you hit present, and that automatically provides instructions at the bottom. Go to menti.com and use this code.
Okay, so we put this code in when we set it up, and then when they go, they get that code. Is that
No,
correct?
it generates the code for you. You don't have to worry about that.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. And they just go to menti.com and okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you can filter the profanity, because I have had some incidents in which people have talked about irrelevant stuff. Now with politics, I have gotten a couple things, and yes, people people are like campaigning. So instead of answering the question, they are putting things like vote for this or that one. And there are some things that you have to take into account. Nothing is perfect. I just want to warn you so that you don't freak out if in the middle of the presentation something pops unexpected. So that's pretty much it.
Okay,
Fun tool, fun tool.
I have another question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The slide that I'm seeing right now, what will you apply from this presentation? And then with the code generated on top, do you create the screen yourself? Is this something that you copy and paste from the from that screen, and then you just put it up here as part of your PowerPoint slide to show the students, your audience?
Just add slide, and it creates a blank slide. I pick the type of question that I want, work loud. Then I type the question, tell me in one word. I decide how many entries per participants I want them to have, maybe one. And that's it. I'm ready to present.
Okay. Is there a session that someone will be doing in the future on this particular Mentimeters? This, because I think this is very useful when you teach a synchronous session. So I would like to explore a little bit further, like all the various features to
Mhm.
use in the class because I think they're very effective. And thank you for showing that.
Absolutely. Actually, yes, that's something that we can do. That's my favorite tool, if you ask me. So we put programs every month, so we can definitely consider doing a Mentimeter one.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, awesome. I will see you there then.
Thank you.
May I ask something, Miko? Actually, you just said that this is one of your favorite ones, but I also picked before that you were suggesting that you might like better pooling, and I was going to ask, what do you prefer pooling over this one?
Because
Well,
with pulling,
if that is, mhm,
it stays right there. I don't have to be switching between screens. It just stays in WebEx. With this one, you have to ask them to have. I mean, I still like Mentimeter a lot, but the fact that sometimes they have to use the phone and I have to, exit one screen and show the other, that takes, some time. The pulling happens in one spot right there.
mhm,
So
yeah,
that's why.
thank you. Yeah,
But the Mentimeter is fancier and has more options.
yes. Mhm.
Yeah, so great. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention. I have enjoyed this session with you. This is just an overview. If you have any questions, you feel free to reach out to us, and we're going to be able to give you more guidance with other topics as needed. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day. Remember that we have a session at 2 p.m. about Flipgrid, which is another amazing tool that you should consider for your classes. Thanks.
Thank you.